The relationship with my family became even more tenuous after I moved out and they saw the house I had bought. They resorted to legal measures, demanding that the house be given to my sister. They lost the lawsuit and were burdened with a debt of $120,000. I have been dwelling on this issue for a long time, questioning whether I need advice. I may just want to express my feelings, but I have always felt unloved within my family. I have a sister, Margaret, who is 5 years younger than me, but we have never gotten along. Her birth seemed to make everything worse. Since childhood, I felt that my parents saw her as the center of their world. She was the golden child, and I was treated as just another person around. I might be overreacting, but looking back, it becomes clear that everything was off. Take last Christmas, for example. Margaret received a brand new PS5 fully set up, something I had wanted. All I had was a pair of plain white socks I bought at Walmart. It's not about the socks themselves, but they were the only gift I had under the Christmas tree. While the family gathered and smiles were all around, Margaret was picking gifts like a little animal scavenging for toys. During this time, the whole house was abuzz for her. In my hands, there was a modestly wrapped package. I sat there in new socks, forcing a smile, completely ignored by everyone around. Unbelievably, this wasn't an exceptional occurrence. My life has always followed this pattern. My family doesn't even remember my birthday. The last time they celebrated it was when I was 10. Since then, it's been forgotten, and last year I quietly celebrated with college friends, with not a single congratulatory word, call, or email from my parents. On the other hand, Margaret's birthdays are always a big deal. Last year for her 16th, my parents threw a lavish party. Family and friends were all invited, and amazingly, a trampoline was set up, with entertainers and magicians called in. The house was filled with decorations, and everything was catered professionally. It was like a festival. However, I wasn't even invited to her birthday party, and I didn't know this fact until the day before. When I asked my parents, they explicitly stated they did not want me to participate. To be honest, I was overwhelmed with my studies at the time. That day, I just went out with friends, focusing on distracting myself from the situation. Still, even when sharing time with my family, I felt as if I wasn't really part of the household, and I couldn't shake off the loneliness. But as my own birthday approached this year, a faint hope emerged that maybe something might change. I had given up on expecting much, but I thought maybe they would acknowledge my existence. However, there was no change. The day to spend with my college friends came again. They organized a small but fun party in the dorm. It was a good time, but it was different from being with family. A birthday, even a small one, should be celebrated with family. Margaret's birthdays always made me acutely aware of what I was missing. I remember when she turned 10, my parents decorated the entire house with pirate adventure themes. For my own 10th birthday, I was just thankful to have pizza. The pain isn't just from having fewer presents or parties, it's from feeling unattractive and that this will always be the case. I always kept up good grades, stayed out of trouble, and tried to do what was asked of me, but I realized that it wasn't important. Margaret was always a person who drew others to her. She was sociable and good at sports, possessing qualities completely different from mine, and my parents were very happy when she was born. I remember the excitement when Margaret was born. I imagined we would become best friends, playing video games and getting along like in the movies. But it quickly became clear that Margaret had little interest in me. She enjoyed sports with her friends and always drew attention. I felt as if I were being forgotten entirely. As I grew older, I began to harbor resentment towards her. Initially, I told myself that it wasn't her fault, but she was beginning to understand the extent of her influence. My parents never blamed her for anything. I was always the one blamed. Even when she made mistakes, my parents would just laugh it off. When Margaret broke the TV, she blamed it on me. Her friends were over, and somehow the TV fell off its stand, nearly breaking completely. When my parents came back, Margaret pointed at me and accused me of causing it. I wasn't even home at the time, but my parents believed her, and I was grounded for a month and had my phone taken away. I was treated like a criminal. After that, I withdrew into my own world, spending most of my time in my room or at friends' houses. I desperately wanted to leave home, but every return reminded me of how worthless I felt. My room was a small, suffocating space, in stark contrast to Margaret's room, which brimmed with the latest electronics and posters of her favorite sports teams. She seemed to have her own little empire, and I felt like an invisible shadow. My 18th birthday was unforgettable. I had a slight hope that it might mark a new start as an adult, but I was let down. That morning started like any other. My mother was busy in the kitchen, my father was engrossed in the newspaper, and Margaret was absorbed in her new Xbox. There were no congratulations, no presents, not even a word to acknowledge my birthday. I felt completely ignored in this house. At that moment, I realized nothing would change. Only Margaret was treated specially. She had taken all the love and attention from me and from our parents. I don't know if she was aware of this fact, but she didn't make it an issue. By her actions, I grew to hate her more. I took the necessary measures. That is, I distanced myself from my parents and arranged my life so I didn't have to witness my sister Margaret's blatant favoritism. Being neglected by my family was draining me internally. Because of this, I chose to avoid contact with them. I moved out as soon as possible and started living with university friends. Honestly, there was a sense of relief, like being freed, but I had to make a living. I began freelancing using my talent in graphic design. At first, it was simply to support myself, but gradually, I got more work, received higher evaluations, and became involved in larger projects. I worked tirelessly, late into the nights and over the weekends. I was determined to build my success independently of my family ties. Then, at the age of 24, a wonderful opportunity came my way. It was meeting a person named Todd. He had all the qualities I was looking for, and was the ideal partner. He was intelligent, ambitious, and had a generous heart. He was also freelancing, specifically managing social media for small and medium businesses. We hit it off right away and started collaborating on various projects. We supported each other and grew in our respective fields. In fact, he was the first person who made me feel like I wasn't just part of the background. He truly understood me, and he loved me not for what I could do for him, but for who I was. His care was not out of obligation, but from genuine feelings. As our careers stabilized, we began to dream bigger futures together. After dating for a year, we moved in together. Things progressed smoothly. We made a bold plan to dip into our savings and buy a home. We were not looking for just an ordinary house, but something special. After a long search, we found a sprawling 3-story house in the suburbs. It was more expensive than we expected, but we managed to pay for it with our combined income. We were very happy. It was truly our dream. It was a result of our joint efforts. We signed the contract and became the official owners 3 days later. The real trouble began 3 days after we moved in. I got a call from my family. At first, I didn't even feel like answering. Since moving out, we had barely spoken, and I had avoided conversations because they were awkward, but the calls kept coming persistently, so I finally answered. And for some reason they said, "We've arrived in town and want to stop by your new home." I was conflicted but agreed to their visit. I should have been more discerning. I thought it best to just get the visit over with rather than avoiding them indefinitely. And a few hours later, my parents and Margaret, along with a man I had never met before, appeared at our new home's entrance. From here, things got even stranger. Margaret had many favorites. The man she brought was her fiancé, Isaac, and Margaret was pregnant. Yes, Margaret was soon to be a mother. Not a single person had told me that my sister was engaged, let alone the fact that she was expecting a child. That was a wake-up call for me. Before even entering the house, my father started making passive-aggressive comments. "Oh, so this is the house you bought. I didn't think you could afford something like this." He said it in a way that seemed to look down on me. But I didn't let it bother me. I wasn't in the mood to argue. When they entered the house, the atmosphere became even more awkward. My mother tried to talk to Todd, but he sensed something was off, glanced at me, and asked what was going on here. At that moment, my father and Margaret were whispering, and Isaac was acting as if the house belonged to him. Then suddenly, my father made an unexpected statement and began to speak decisively. "I think it makes sense for Margaret and Isaac to move in here to build their family and make space for the baby," he stated arrogantly. I was so stunned by his words that I could only stare. "This place is too large for you and Todd." My father continued, ignoring how upset I was. "Margaret and Isaac really need a large place like this to raise a child. You two don't need all this space." I couldn't believe my ears. My father looked me straight in the eye, and what he said next made me feel indignant. "This is no joke. It's time for you to step aside. You should give up what your sister needs. The family should come first, and she is starting a new family. You and Todd can find a smaller place. This house is more suitable for them." I was devastated. Years of resentment suddenly overflowed. This home is Todd's and mine. We bought this house, and it's in our names. No one else gets to make decisions for us. Margaret then interjected with a smug look. "Wait a minute. I can't see why you need such a large place. Unlike you, we have a child. That's not the issue." I exploded with anger. "The problem is that you're claiming what's mine as your own and trying to take it away. I've lived a repressed life for too long. I can't take it anymore." At that moment, my father became very aggressive. He stood up, puffed out his chest, and berated me high-handedly. "You should be grateful," he said. "It's shameful to live in a house that's beyond your means. If you give it to Margaret, she won't have to feel that way, will she? Besides, they aren't demanding the keys, they're just asking. Whether you like it or not, this house becoming Margaret's is inevitable," he added. At that point, my anger finally erupted. Unable to grasp what was happening, I lunged at my father and pinned him against the wall. "Get out of this house right now," I shouted. Todd tried to calm us down, but I couldn't stop. Years of anger erupted all at once. My father pushed back, and without realizing it, we were fighting and yelling at each other. My mother and Margaret were screaming, and Isaac was frantically making a phone call in the corner. The fight didn't stop until the police arrived. It must have been Isaac who called the police. The situation spiraled out of control, and they separated us, handcuffed my father and me, and took us to the police car. I never thought it would come to this. I never expected my father would try to take the house from me, and as a result, I ended up in jail. Hours later, Todd paid my bail, but the damage was already severe. My family was irreparably broken, but it wasn't over yet. Things got even worse. My father cunningly decided to sue me over the house, arguing that Margaret and Isaac needed it more than I did, demanding that I hand it over, and actually took the matter to court. I couldn't hide my shock at his audacious actions. Thus, we went to court. I hired a lawyer and gathered all documents proving the house was registered in my name, preparing for the most crucial battle of my life. However, I had something hidden. There were traces of mental and psychological abuse I had suffered over the years, and I intended to reveal them. I collected evidence. Emails, text messages, and even witnesses, including friends who had observed my parents' behavior towards me over the years, were gathered to testify. We brought all this to court. My lawyer emphasized not only that the house belonged to me, but also that I was a victim of neglect and psychological abuse in the past. The trial lasted several months, and my father used various tactics to demean me. He portrayed himself as a loving father who was doing his best for the family. Margaret and Isaac played the victims, pleading that they needed the house for their baby and condemning me for not giving it up as selfish, but they were not successful. When the verdict was finally announced, I felt relieved of a huge burden. The court ruled in my favor and further ordered my father to pay $120,000 in damages for the mental and psychological abuse. For the first time in my life, I felt that justice was served as someone stood up for my rights. Following the judgment, I decided to completely cut off contact with my parents and Margaret. I could no longer endure manipulation, falsehoods, and unfair favoritism. Together with Todd, we finally made the house truly ours and began building a new life, though the scars from the past had not fully healed. Even now, as I write this, it's unbelievable to think how much my parents tried to deceive me, but that was the reality. Margaret had once been the favored youngest child, but that situation has changed. It has been about 3 years since then. Before continuing this story, let me tell you about our wedding, which took place 3 years ago. It was the happiest day of my life and the best decision I've ever made. Having overcome complex family issues, Todd remained my steadfast support. After the court battle with my father, it was confirmed that Todd was the only person I could truly trust. We had a small, intimate ceremony with just Todd's close friends and relatives, without inviting my parents, sister, or any other family members. The manipulation, abuse, and subsequent litigation they had subjected me to were incomprehensible. I didn't want their toxic behavior to ruin my wedding day, as I had fully realized their true nature. However, a few days after the wedding, I received a long guilt-inducing email from my mother, expressing how hurt she was for not being invited. How she found out remains unclear. My father did not attempt to contact me, which was fine by me, but Margaret seemed to have lost her self-control. This was predictable. Margaret had always been the golden child, constantly striving to please our parents. She never accepted responsibility for her life, always shifting blame for her mistakes onto others. Although the court's favorable decision and the ordered payment of $120,000 to me affected my parents' finances, it did not bankrupt them, but their financial flexibility was significantly reduced. Spoiled throughout her life, Margaret could not handle this new reality. She believed she had a right to inherit the house my father owned, but she could not make that a reality. Her demands for a large sum of money were just the beginning of her disappointments. Her fiancé, Isaac, left her a few months after the trial. Reportedly, Margaret had a miscarriage due to mental stress. It all felt like my fault. The sequence of events, my father losing the lawsuit, facing financial difficulties, and Isaac leaving Margaret, seemed to be blamed on me. Then, the situation completely changed. A month into our marriage, as Todd and I were adjusting to our new life, we enjoyed the peace of being free from family toxicity. One day we decided to take a walk in our neighborhood. As we strolled down the quiet streets, we breathed in the fresh air, refreshing our spirits. It was supposed to be a normal day. We had walked about half a block when we encountered Margaret. She was standing on the corner, staring intently at me. Her eyes were filled with anger. My heart froze in an instant. I hadn't seen her since the trial, and I couldn't understand why she would suddenly appear near me. Confused, I yelled, "What are you doing here?" Before I could grasp the situation, she charged at me. In her hand was an iron rod, apparently taken from a construction site. I tried to retreat, screaming, but she was too fast. She swung the rod and hit my abdomen before I could react. Pain shot through me instantly, sharp as if my ribs were engulfed in flames. I bent over, gasping for breath, but Margaret's attack was not over yet. She swung the rod down again, this time aiming at my feet. The rod struck my left shin with a sickening sound, and I collapsed weakly onto the sidewalk. "You ruined my life." Margaret continued to shout, trembling with anger. "It's all your fault. You caused our father's financial collapse. It's your fault Isaac left. Everything broke because of you." I managed to stand and tried to defend myself, but my body wouldn't move properly. I'm not sure how much time passed, but gradually I heard voices growing louder in the distance. There were shouts from people around and footsteps rushing towards me. I saw someone grab Margaret and pull her away, but my consciousness was fading and I couldn't grasp what was happening. When I regained consciousness, I was in a hospital bed. Todd was sitting beside me, his face pale and his eyes red with tears. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry and my body screamed in pain. "Are you okay?" Todd whispered as he gripped my hand tightly. "I'm okay." But I was far from okay. I had multiple broken ribs, a fractured left leg, and a broken right arm. The doctor told me it was fortunate that I had survived. If it hadn't been for the bystanders who intervened, Margaret might have killed me. I had to call the police to stop her. Margaret was arrested at the scene and handcuffed while I lay bleeding on the sidewalk. Afterwards, my consciousness faded and I remained in a dazed state. Under the influence of pain medication, my body slowly began to recover, and during that time, Todd stayed by my side constantly. He managed everything, including the police reports, insurance paperwork, and hiring a lawyer in preparation for the upcoming trial. A trial was scheduled because Margaret faced serious charges for assault with a weapon, and given the severity of my injuries, she was looking at a long-term sentence. Once I was conscious and could understand the situation, Todd explained everything to me. After being abandoned by Isaac, Margaret had a mental breakdown. She fell into severe depression and, according to the police report, refused to acknowledge her own failings, instead shifting all the blame onto me. Margaret, who had waited outside my house for hours and brought an iron rod from a nearby construction site to attack me, told the police she did not regret her actions. When questioned by the police, she justified her behavior by claiming that I had destroyed her life and was merely seeking justice. She truly believed that I was the cause of all the problems she faced, including her fiancé leaving her and her father's financial troubles. I spent a long time in the hospital recovering from my fractures, and every day was painful. The ongoing physical therapy, relentless medical examinations, and the looming pressure of the trial weighed heavily on me. I couldn't walk for an extended period, and even after being discharged from the hospital, I needed crutches and arm support for a while. The doctors warned me that it could take months to fully recover, and there was a possibility that I might not completely regain my prior level of function. Months of treatment and recovery later, the trial against Margaret began. Margaret pleaded not guilty, holding on to the misguided belief that her actions were absolutely justified. She felt that I was to blame for the situation that had influenced her actions. Her defense argued that she acted out of mental distress and that a series of familial events had destabilized her mental state. However, the evidence presented in court strongly suggested her guilt. Eyewitnesses to the incident had seen Margaret's attack on me and had immediately called the police. The prosecution submitted detailed medical reports of my injuries and police reports that included evidence of Margaret's premeditated attack. It was clear she had come to my home with the intent to harm me. Sitting in court and watching my sister try to justify her actions against me was more heart-wrenching than any hardship I had previously endured. Throughout the trial, she never once looked in my direction. To her, it was as if I no longer existed. But perhaps the most gut-wrenching moment was seeing my parents not only appear in court, but sit by Margaret, listening and nodding as if in agreement every time she claimed I had destroyed her life. Their nodding was like a knife twisting in my chest. Despite such betrayal, they still chose her side. They seemed to firmly believe she was the victim. Their support for her remained unchanged. The trial lasted several weeks, but the verdict was almost predetermined from the start. From the courtroom atmosphere and testimonies, the outcome was anticipated. Margaret was convicted of serious assault charges and was ultimately sentenced to 5 years in prison. She would be eligible for parole in 3 years, following the legal process, but honestly, that fact no longer mattered to me. I had accepted the reality of being without a family. Through this ordeal, it became clear that those who were supposed to be my family were not true family at all. But at least, Throughout everything, Todd has been an invaluable presence, steadfastly supporting me. He faced every difficult situation unflinchingly, always standing with me and providing strong support. We are focused on moving forward positively. I am gradually recovering, both physically and mentally, and I'm starting to see a brighter future ahead, little by little. I continue to receive therapy consistently to overcome the trauma of past events, but it's a slow and lengthy process. There are days when I feel better than the previous day and can genuinely appreciate my progress, but there are also challenging days when it's hard to face myself. The reflection in the mirror feels starkly different from who I once was. I cannot predict what the future holds, but I've resolved to cherish each day as it comes. And now, at least, I have a clear understanding of who I can truly trust.